It doesn't work. Hey there. I'm going to put in my headset, probably a little better.
Guys, can you guys hear me?
Yo.
Oh, good. Ahmed is in another meeting. I just left. He should be here about 10, 15 minutes, but I told him I could do that.
He just got here.
What's that?
Looks like he's here.
Oh, no, that's the other Ahmed. You have two Ahmeds.
Sorry.
Hey, guys.
Hey, guys. Hey, Mark.
I'll join video soon. I just finished my workout, so just gotta.
Oh, Ahmed. Okay, yeah.
The
other Ahmed.
Yeah.
See?
It's not very often we get two Ahmeds in one meeting there, by the way. This is a...
Yeah, more than, you think you'd have two Mikes or two Johns, right? But
yeah. That's okay, though.
So, how you guys doing?
Fabulous.
Great. How are you doing?
Just, living the dream, man. So
There you go.
Hey,
what else
I'm looking forward to your presentation on the cloud comparison thing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in it. So it's
yeah, good.
Yeah. So the Oracle account manager, he's like, should I share this with invite a bunch of Oracle customers? I'm like, I don't know, right? There's some good stuff about Oracle and some other not so good stuff, so you might want to pull back on that. So. But,
yeah, I got in trouble many years ago when I put on a user group meeting, and somebody they didn't say anything mean or anybody about Oracle, but they were just talking about like the basics, right? Like if you're gonna negotiate with Oracle, wait till the end of the quarter, like about 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, right? I mean, just obvious stuff, right? I mean, it's not like anyone who's been around long enough, that's kind of what you do, it's like, anyway. And so he got really upset with me. He was like, how could you do that to me? You're, blah, blah, blah. Like, what did I do? Like, I didn't do anything.
Kids, what can you do?
I don't know. It's like, and then I thought to myself, if you think if that's what, like, really, come on, I don't know.
Yeah.
So while we're waiting for the other Ahmed, just a couple notes. The mouse meeting is October 26th through the 29th, Monday through Thursday. It will be virtual. And so each day, so you just pay one registration fee. It's $25. And then each day we'll have 6 speakers. If you go to our website, you can see Monday and Tuesday's database. I think Wednesday's application, and then Thursday is EPM, right? Or maybe EPM's on Wednesday, whatever. But if you go to the website, you can see we got 30 speakers. I think it runs from 9 to 4, right? 9 to 12, and then from 1 to 4. So we have an hour break in between that. So it's not a bad price, $25 for the entire week. So hopefully you guys will join. We got some great speakers. In fact, here's a scoop that we had so many great presentations submitted that I couldn't fulfill all the spots. We would have to speak for 12 hours a day. That was not going to happen. So what we're going to do, though, is starting November Monday, whatever the first.
It'll be the
Monday.
second.
Yeah, is that second?
That's the first Monday, Adam.
Yeah, okay. November 2nd, we're going to do Mouse Mondays, and we're going to have a webinar for the next 8 or 10 weeks so that we can get all the speakers that have submitted their presentations. So. Look forward to that. I got to put together a little, I already have the speakers. That's the good part. Then now the next thing is I got to create the
schedule.
I got the schedule as well. I just got to create the little, what do you call it? Not PowerPoint, but the little, God, my words today. God, I'm not thinking very clearly.
Senior moment.
Like
thanks, Arnold. like that, never mind. But anyway, I got to create something to show what user is going to be there and stuff, what are speaking. So graphic, I think the word I'm looking for is graphic. So,
okay, sure.
And I'm not very good at it. So if you know someone who's really good at creating graphics, all I need is one little graphics thing that I can put in there. So, but that's not me. I'm not the graphic guy. So, so that's coming up November 2nd through, I think it's almost every Monday except for the 16th and I forget what other day, but it's basically through the end of the year. So there's 8 weeks of, 7 or 8 weeks of presentations. Actually, with the number of presentations I got, we could probably go into March, but I don't know if we want to do that. But but it's just a great list of speakers. I mean, it was so hard to pick. I only could pick 12, and I was like, I don't know which ones to pick. So I got some help, and we picked, and we just said, okay, this is the way it is, and you know.
So you just threw them in a hat, pulled 12 out.
No. Everyone that you've seen on there is Oracle Aces, all 12. I believe anyway. I think all but the 2 Oracle speakers. And they're all Oracle Aces or Ace directors. And then I also, unfortunately, like Rick and stuff, who was another Oracle Ace, I had to. He was very understanding, though. It worked out pretty well, actually, for Rick. But
yeah, actually, it was fine because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it anyway. So it's good.
Anyway. So who do we all got here? We got 9 participants. Wow.
Woo!
Hey, wow. Who's bringing a pizza?
Where's my pizza? I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I know.
Hey, Mike.
I've still been waiting for those jalapenos.
Yeah, I know.
Hey, this is Ahmed, number 2. Can you? So, by the way, I am not the speaker for those on the call. Can you? I invited a few folks to this. Can you give a background on what this group is about, the meetups, a little bit of history? Sure. For some of the people who haven't, first time, because people get just an invite and they don't know what the group is about and so forth.
So basically, what this group is this group was started back in 1987, 86, 87, by a gal named Nancy Summers and Mark Krasinski or something like that. Maybe Rick would know. Mark. Anyway, back in 1987.
My memory only goes back so far these days.
I know. So the whole idea is they wanted to have a kind of a user group at that point just to share information. And so I know I've given this example many times, but at my first user group meeting I went to, I was working on forms and I needed to be able to get the heading and the detail in line. And sure enough, we went to the meeting and somebody had the solution right there. Here, all you have to do is, X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden the header and detail are all lined up. And I tell you what, it saved me, I worked on that for about a week until I went to that user group, and it saved me lots of time and effort to do it. So the whole idea is sharing Oracle information. So for the longest time, we were meeting, we were having 4-hour, half-day meetings twice a year, and then a big full-day meeting once a year to share information. So we had Oracle speakers, we had non-Oracle speakers talking about Oracle database stuff, tuning and you name it, products and etc. And then probably about, what would you guys say about the last 3 years? A lot of people have been saying, hey, listen, we want to do a webinar. We want to be able to connect via webinar and stuff. And we said, okay, so we set up this meetup because the biggest problem I was having is we couldn't meet at the location anymore. So we went away from the half-day meetings because I'll be honest with you, I couldn't find somebody to put on the meeting to put on the meetings. So, and that, number one, and number two, we couldn't find a venue. We couldn't find a hotel that was cheap enough and everything else. So we said, well, what the heck? Why don't we start a meetup, and then we could just meet up either at a bar or at a place and just talk about Oracle stuff. And then if we have any meet and stuff like that, we could also do like a webinar. So that's how the meetup started. And so then COVID hit. Okay. Well, we were kind of ahead there. We knew how to do webinars and stuff like that. So what this meeting is about sharing information, Oracle information, sharing any kind of problems you might have, like I did with the header and detail. Just talking about Oracle and some of your experiences with Oracle. That you're working with. So that's the whole idea behind this meetup. It's just a way to share information, to connect to other people, do networking, and that's the main idea. It's the sharing of the knowledge. So we have a lot of smart people on this call, and we always say the same thing every week. It's like, hey, does anybody want to bring a problem to the group? Like nobody says anything, and then I'll say something like, oh, so you guys aren't having any Oracle problems at all. Everything's just working great. And then all of a sudden someone say, oh, yeah, I've been trying to do this. Now that you mention, I'm trying to do this, and that doesn't work, and etc. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Maybe Rick or Arnold or Mark want to expand upon it. I don't know if I've included everything.
I think you got it.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Good. So that's what this meeting's about. It's about sharing information. So, and that's what we're doing today. Today's guest, if him and I just left the meeting, so I'm hoping he joins pretty soon. He is he's currently running the current Michigan Oracle User Summit. He's the chairperson for the meeting. And so what they're doing now is they're testing the Zoom capabilities and stuff. So it will be all Zoom. Like I said, it's not a bad price, $25. You can't beat that. And it's all week, so you get all these sessions for 25 weeks plus the recordings and everything else. So
$25, not 25
what's that?
weeks.
Yeah,
it's for $25, not 25 weeks.
Yeah, sorry, $25. So you can't beat that for a week's worth of sessions, over 30 sessions. So, so that, like I said, it's coming up October 26th through the 29th, and you can register at www.mous.us. As a matter of fact, let me pull this up. And I'll share my screen. Mark. Which one? The E17?
Paulsgrove.
Yes. Yeah.
We keep losing him.
He's here. He's on phone though.
No, he's his picture.
What's that? Oh, his picture.
We keep on losing his picture.
Oh well.
So
I don't know.
I just got a stand. I was holding it up.
Okay.
And not yet. I wasn't using my laptop, so I'm connected with video on my laptop. No, on my phone. But I'm also E127506.
Oh, gotcha.
Did they write a song about that? E127506.
81793.
You're gonna scare everybody away.
Well, you know what's going to happen is everyone is going to be singing that song all night long, and I'm going to get evil emails about this later on.
I'm not going to.
So hopefully that answers your question, Ahmed, and all the new folks. I see Charles is on, and Kathy, and Pradeep, and so thank you guys. Before I just see Ahmed is on, but before he gets there, I'll just show the screen real quick. I'll show the meeting. Share screen. Where are we? Okay.
Hey, I see you shaved, man. Looking good.
Okay, can you guys see the mouse
yes,
website?
Indeed.
Oh, it's very pretty.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So the agenda is just up at the upper top here. Hopefully you guys can see that as well. And open up the schedule.
La schedule.
Can you guys still see that?
No.
The new schedule?
Well, it's white. Oh, there it is.
Okay, so we have Ahmed number 2 speaking, Michael Clark, Jim Shrabinski. I always have trouble with that. Yeah. Roy Swanger is always a good talk. He's a product manager. Charles Kim. That's this Monday. And then Tuesday, we have a bunch of great speakers as well, including Ahmed number 1 is speaking. And then Wednesday, we have Alfredo Ahmed number 1 speaking twice on WebLogic. And this is all EBS kind of application related kind of stuff. And then finally on Thursday, we have some great EPM and EBS stuff. So, so to register, just go back to that page again. Yeah, so let me pull that up. Oops, sorry, wrong page.
So I imagine you're going to be spending a lot of time in the EBS material there, Mike, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny you should say that. I don't know if some people don't know that I got laid off back in October or August, but so I've got a couple EBS things, and I'm like, oh God, should I even? Don't want to go down that road. Anyhow, yeah. So there's a bunch of EBS stuff. Yeah, I'll probably be on there, Arnold. And then finally. What's that?
We got to learn it again, eh?
Yeah, climbing that hill. And then finally, you can register here, that little blue button, and that's $25. But if you register on that the day of the event, it'll be $50. So pre-register. So that's the basic thing. So other than that, I think, let me stop sharing my screen. Is there any questions before we have Ahmed start the talk?
No questions.
Have at it.
Okay.
How many new guys do we have on the phone?
We have a total of 13.
We're rocking today.
Yeah. So let me see.
So you would offer the opportunity to say what a great group this is, and this is a fantastic group. I've made so many good, well-informed decisions from going to the user group meetings and the conferences, and there's a depth and breadth of knowledge here. I think rarely have I run out of options when I'm stuck on something. They, usually can get pointed in the right way, and I've learned fantastic technical details that have really made me look like a star back at work.
Oh.
And Rick is teaching the Oracle tuning class again, so I highly recommend that.
Yep. Well, speaking of that, that's a good segue, because our talk today is from Ahmed Alomari, and he's going to be talking about some SQL tuning. So here, I'm going to make you the host, Ahmed. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Mike.
Hey. So you are now the host with the most.
Okay.
So,
up the deck.
So thank you for speaking today. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm registering for the mouse event, and it wants my phone number. It's not mandatory, but who gets my phone number if I put my phone number in there?
We do. We do. It's only if we have to contact you for any kind of changes and stuff like that. Especially, by the way, put your email in it, because what we're going to be doing is every day we're going to be sending out another Zoom meeting invite for that particular day. So if we don't have your email, you will not get that invite, and then you'll miss out, and that would be very bad.
Mike, don't you already have his phone number running through your head all night long?
Yeah, I do. E2, E127506.
So if I check the box that you can share my information with participating vendors,
Well,
does
that one
include
is
the
up
phone
to you.
number?
You can say no, and then we won't share nothing with anybody.
So they will get my phone number and email?
No,
if I
they'll
check
get
the box?
nothing. They'll get nothing.
No, if I check that it's okay.
Oh yeah, that Ahmed, what will they get if
Just the name and email and
yeah,
title is what is given. Yeah, we don't share phone number.
Yeah.
All right.
So okay,
nobody calls you anyway. You might as well give out your phone number. I mean, jeez.
Mark, you're just a quick comment.
I'm home alone. I need people to call me and talk to me.
Mute your microphones and there won't be as many issues.
Okay. Are you able to see the deck?
Yep. I'm seeing it.
Yep.
All right, sounds good. Good evening, everyone. Today we're going to talk about basically SQL tuning and kind of where to start, in production. So as far as the agenda for the session, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, often that we run into in real life and trying to improve SQL performance, as well as what steps we should take about identifying the SQL and then, improving the SQL performance without, code change. Feel free to ask any questions throughout. So one of the big challenges, of course, is typically as an administrator, as a DBA or an application administrator, for example, you might be seeing that some expensive SQL is impacting the system, might be doing a tremendous amount of physical I/O, for example, and then causing, for example, other performance transactions to miss their SLAs because I/O latency is now higher. Commit windows are increasing, things like that. So some of the challenges, of course, include that if it's a third-party app, and sometimes the source code is not available, or it's a custom application, but for example, there's developers who wrote the original custom app are no longer available. In some cases, you might be using packaged applications and you don't have access to the source code. For example, if it's a Java application or a C application, like for example, the database code. Or even within e-business suite, for example, some of the pro C code like GL import, GL post, or payroll, for example, you don't have access to the source code, you just have access to the binaries. And in some cases, for example, fixing the SQL itself, might take a long time, just even if you do have the source code, to follow the change code process, track down a developer, get him to drop what he or she is doing, make this code fix, promote it to quality test, and then get it scheduled for production. That latency cycle is usually, very long, even if you do have the luxury of, having access to the source code. So sometimes that can delay relief where, there's a quick fix for the SQL to bring something down that's, running in hours to minutes or seconds. But just because of cycle time, you don't have that, luxury essentially. And meanwhile, the business process is, being impacted. So typically, for example, the application might be running, in a steady state. Performance is fine. For example, throughput is being met. Performance SLAs are being met, and then all of a sudden, some trigger point happens to cause the job or transaction, for example, to run much longer than expected. Thereby causing delays in downstream processes. And that can happen, of course, for various sorts of reasons. Sometimes the data volume increases, and the SQL statement was written, for a certain case of data volumes and didn't really anticipate the kind of growth, and the SQL kind of fell over with those new volumes. Or for example, it could be a concurrency factor where, the SQL was kind of designed to run for a few sets of requests, and now there's, thousands of requests running the same SQL, for example. And again, the reason for sometimes, SQL say, I'm sure all of you being DBAs or experiencing with performance issues in your past, you've always run into that scenario where things are running fine and there hasn't been any change as far as, explicit change, meaning, parameter change or upgrades or, patching or code fixes. But all of a sudden the SQL just went south, due to various reasons. Could be, for example, the data distribution changed For example, the weekly stats job maybe runs on the weekends. You come in Monday morning and all of a sudden the SQL went south, Monday morning because of the stats, even though nothing really changed as such. Your business volume didn't change, your code didn't change, environment itself didn't change, just because that small change in data distribution caused a difference in selectivity calculation or cardinality estimates, for example. And then of course you can have many reasons for execution plan changes, even if you don't gather stats, even if literally nothing on the system changed for various reasons. And of course this has been evolving, from 10G to 11G to 12C and now 19C. They've been expanding the scenarios for which plans can change at runtime, even though nothing else in the system changed. For example, we now have dynamic statistics that can be incorporated. So even though you didn't explicitly gather stats on the table, because dynamic statistics is enabled, for example, in 19C, then if you do a mass DML operation, that can basically bump the in-memory statistics that the optimizer uses and then cause plan changes. There's also the adaptive plans as well. The adaptive feature is essentially when you execute the cursor, the optimizer looks at the bind variable values, for example, and says, maybe the bind variable values that they used in previous executions are not representative of the current execution and therefore can trigger a different plan. A good example is if you have a like predicate. So say you have a query like select from customer table where customer name is like a bind variable, and the previous executions, people were putting in fully qualified customer names, which would be pretty selective. And then at some point, someone executed the query and just put a % in there as a wildcard, right? So that would have 100% selectivity versus someone putting in a fully qualified name. And so that would cause an adaptive plan change, and you'd probably end up, with a full table scan in that scenario. Environment changes, for example, by environment, I mean like session environment. So for example, the cursor was executed as a US user, setting the NLS lang to a US region, and then the NLS lang was switched to a multi-byte, for example. That can also impact the plan. There's bind peaking, like the case we just talked about, if you have like predicates or between predicates or range predicates, for example. That's also a common. And then obviously, from time to time, database bugs can occur to change the execution plan. Other reasons, of course, for the SQL performance going south is, a code change. Developer maybe, added some more filters in the where clause or put an or condition in, or, even added some columns to the select clause, because that can affect, the clustering factor, for example. Patches, any database patches or application patches that can obviously introduce, new behavior, new code. And then any parameter or infrastructure changes that were done, such as, for example, we had a customer scenario the other day where they upgraded their hardware and their storage. So they basically, re-platformed, but then the database itself was the same. The database files and storage, didn't change, just that they got essentially faster storage by moving to SSD LUNs. And also the clock speed of the processors changed. So when they refresh the system stats, the previous IO latency was, like 7 to 8 milliseconds because they had a mix of SSD and some storage, some physical disk. And then when they moved to an all flash appliance, the average latencies were, sub-milliseconds. So now the system statistics reflected that, of course, and now they started seeing a lot more full table scans that they didn't see before, because now the costing says, hey, I can do full table scans 10 times cheaper than they were before, because of the new storage. So sometimes that's also something to keep in mind. The one thing that I always stress, which I feel is really important, is before you start tuning a SQL statement, even though it might be consuming a lot of load on the system, it's very important to first identify what is the business process that's triggering that SQL statement. And a lot of times, that's not necessarily known, right? We start tuning a SQL and we improve things, and then the user says, oh, that didn't really, help user performance, but it did reduce load on the system. And I think that's obviously, important to, that's why you should always tie it back to the business process. So the first thing is, is this part of an online transaction? Is there a UI, user interface that's executing the SQL? Which UI? Is it a search UI? Is it transactional AI? Does it happen when a user is doing a search for previous transactions, or does it occur when they create a new one as part of a saving a line or adding a line? things like that. Is it part of a critical job that runs? How often does that job run? Is that job running every minute, every hour, once a day type of thing? Is it part of a month-end report? Once you identify essentially what is the triggering business process, then that can also help provide relief, because sometimes, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this as well, that you find something that's running expensive on the system, and when you trace it down back to the functional folks or business folks, they say, oh yeah, we're not really using that report anymore, or we don't need that process anymore, just shut it off. So that can also be another important reason why to find out what the transaction is tied to. And more importantly, if it is something that's really used, like if it's part of an online transaction, maybe it's part of the web store transaction, in which case there will be a lot of users, then you can actually tie it back to end user performance, because after fixing it, then you really should be able to say, for example, saving an order used to take whatever 10 seconds. Now by tuning that SQL, it's down to 2 seconds. So you should start seeing better throughput on the system. But it's very important to always try to tie it back to the business process. Often us being technical, of course, we tend to jump on the technical side. It's very important, I think, to correlate that back to the actual business process, because there may be some refinement that's needed there. Maybe something that's online that shouldn't be an online should be deferred, and vice versa. Something that's deferred should be online, things like that. Or it could be just as simple as a scheduling thing, right? By mistake, someone scheduled it to run every minute when it only needs to run once a day. Okay, so in terms of identifying the top SQL, so how do you identify, what tools or things, are available to the DBA to kind of identify where the top SQL? So I'm sure everyone, is familiar with, AWR, which is the automatic workload repository that was introduced new in 10G, which was kind of the successor to StatsPack. StatsPack, of course, is still there. It's still free in cases where you don't have the, Enterprise Edition, for example, or if you don't have the tuning pack. For example, that's also another option. Then, of course, there's ASH, which is the active session history. You can also identify the top SQL there. And then there's also drill downs to, within the ASH report to see where in that SQL statement is taking time. For example, which row source, is dominating the time. And then there's also the AWR SQL report itself, where you can actually run a SQL report for a specific SQL statement. Again, that will give you drill downs in terms of where it thinks the time is being spent, and some recommendations that it can provide. So in terms of the workload repository, again, you have basically the standard sections under that SQL statistics. So you have, of course, SQL order by time, by CPU time, by user IO, gets, reads, all the various areas, memory, parsing. And so typically the advice is, try to target the respective area of the problematic, pain point. So for example, if you were seeing a lot of library cache latch contention or library cache locks, or maybe a lot of mutex waits, you would probably want to focus your attention on, order by parse calls, because usually when you have a lot of library cache contention or mutex waits, it's typically you're doing a lot of, either soft parse or a lot of hard parse on the system. So it's best to go and tackle the SQLs by parsing, so that you can reduce the mutex contention, reduce the library cache contention. If you're seeing a lot of rack waits, for example, then you would probably, a lot of interconnect traffic, such as 100 megabytes a second being pushed across the interconnect, then you would probably want to look at the SQL order by cluster weights to, again, tackle those SQLs that are actually causing a lot of GC traffic. And if you're, for example, your host is out of juice, you're running at 100% CPU, and of course you want to reduce load, then you would refer to the CPU time section. And for example, if you're trying to tackle IO weights, because there's just too much physical IOPS occurring on your storage, and therefore it's impacting the overall storage latency, then of course you would want to look at either the physical reads section or the user IO weight section. So typically you'd want to kind of focus your attention on the area for the specific problem that you're trying to tackle. And of course, in the elapsed time, it'll have the SQL ID, the SQL text, the module that it's coming from, and then, sort of a breakdown of how much time it's taking, and then what percentage of that SQL, represents kind of the total. So I always, for example, if you were looking at elapsed time, you can see here, for example, one of the SQL statements, the third one down, took 263 seconds. just a little less than 5 minutes. Was executed once during that snapshot. So that's another thing you'd want to look at is, for example, how often is it being executed, within that snapshot? For example, the second one there, it's executed 3.3 million times within that snapshot window, which is, very high. So that would be an example of one we would want to target to say, why are there so many, executions? And that's almost like, 15% of the load. You can also generate an ASH report by SQL ID, or you can, of course, query the ASH repository directly. Again, this does require Enterprise Edition, and it does require the tuning pack. But if you have that, essentially, you can either query the view, which is a DBA hist active session history. You can filter by, of course, you can filter by session ID, you can filter by module, action, you can filter by SQL ID and machine. So, for example, one common thing that's, when you typically need to query the view itself is you have a particular SQL ID that's either alternating plans, like for example has maybe 2 or 3 different plans and one plan is better than the other. Then you can query that to say which plan hash is getting the good performance, for example, and which module action is executing with a good plan versus the ones that are executing it with a bad plan. And then of course you can punch in the SQL ID on the run ash report, and that'll generate you the ASH report that has the SQL. So once you generate that report, then it'll show you the plan hash that's being used, and then it'll also tell you the sampled executions. So don't pay too much attention to the actual number, only that you should know that the number, if it's more than 1, then you know that this particular session is executing this statement in a loop. It's not a single execution, for example. So a lot of times I find that sample execution is way off, meaning here it's showing 19 executions, but more than likely this SQL is probably executed thousands of times in the session. But because ASH, of course, does sampling, it only picked up a small sample. So the key there is when you want to see the sample number execution, that's a good indicator to you to say, did this program run the SQL only once, or is it running it multiple times? And then here it's of course showing that pretty much the bulk of the load, close to 100%, is spent, by this SQL statement. So that means, of course, I should focus my attention on there. And then it tells you essentially which row source, is taking the bulk of the time. So here it's showing like the DB file sequential read was about 45% of the time. And then it gives you the row source. And the report actually cuts it off. But if you actually query the DB active session history view, it'll actually give you the line number of the plan. Which is really nice, because then you can pretty much tie that back to the explain plan and say, okay, it's line 5 of the plan, and that's this specific table or this specific index, for example. And then of course here it's also showing GC buffer busy waits, which is another 31% of the time. There's also the SQL details active report. This is actually pretty cool. In 19C it also got expanded, and so if you punch in the SQL ID, for example, it'll tell you the SQL statement, and then it'll give you kind of the row source, breakdown by time. So here, and then it gives you some overall metrics as well. So for example, it tells you, okay, this SQL took an hour, for example, of the database time, it was 1.2 hours, and then it tells you how much time was PL SQL versus Java versus SQL time. So here, the predominant time was SQL time. There wasn't really too much in Java or PL SQL. And you can see that it did 24 million buffer gets, and this specific SQL did almost 7.6 million IOs, and actually scanned about 140 gigabytes. So it's nice. So if you have a complex plan, you can actually use the bottom part where it's showing the specific row source information. You can see which one is dominating the time here. So here we can see that the dominating time is actually the table lookup when it hits the workflow history table. And then also, if your SQL statement is coming from a PL SQL package, if you click on the general section, so when you click on the details of the SQL, it shows you the text. And then you guys are, I'm pretty sure, familiar with the various tabs. So you have the statistics tab, activity tab, plan tab. So usually you'd click on the plan tab, for example, and that would show you the execution plan that's being used. And then in the general section, it'll actually show you the package name, and then in parentheses, it's the line number. So for any SQL statement that's coming from PL SQL, server-side PL SQL, it'll actually show you the package name and the line number. So that makes it easier to kind of track down the source of that SQL. That's also if you know, for those of you who don't use Enterprise Manager, if you just want to query directly, BDAR SQL has 2 columns, the program ID and program line number. So the program ID that maps back to the value in DBA objects, which will be the corresponding PL SQL unit, either the package body, trigger, or type body, whichever PL SQL unit happens to be coming from. And then the line number will be the actual line number in that particular PL SQL unit. And then one thing to keep in mind too is that it doesn't happen that much, but sometimes when developers cut and paste code, let's say you have 2 different packages, for example, that have the same SQL text, then the first session to hard parse that SQL will populate the program ID. So just keep in mind that if it's the same exact SQL, it may not actually be coming from that package because that's just happens to be the hard parse one. But that's only if, of course, if the text is completely the same. Okay, so options to tune the SQL. So first thing is what I recommend highly is to look at these statistics to make sure that the plan that's you're trying to analyze, or the plan that, for example, may not be efficient. Let's find out why the optimizer chose that plan. Many cases, at least in my experience, many of the reasons why you get a bad plan is typically statistics driven. Not that you didn't gather stats, or the stats are old or stale, but it's just that the statistics that are present are causing the optimizer to generate a certain cardinality or a certain selectivity estimate. And you may have complex predicates, for example, NVLs or decodes, or lots of subqueries, for example, for which those default estimates are just resulting in a suboptimal plan. So first thing, definitely make sure your statistics are valid and representative. Notice that I don't say that the word current, because these days we tend to deal with very large databases, multiple terabytes, some customers even having hundreds of terabytes of data, and asking them to gather stats is just not practical. And in my personal experience, most of the large database shops these days, they don't really gather stats even weekly. It's more like quarterly or monthly at best, and very targeted. If there's a certain table that needs stats, they might refresh that. But once you get to a certain size database, you just really can't afford that kind of downtime window or processing window to, spend 20 hours or 30 hours gathering stats on all the tables, especially if you have a large number of objects. So in my opinion, it's not really important to have current statistics. They just need to be valid and representative. So as an example, if you have like a journal lines table and you have 1.1 billion rows, next week it's 1.2 billion rows, there's no reason to gather stats, even though you added what might sound like a significant amount of data. The actual data distribution itself is the same, right? The distribution between the number of journals and journal lines is largely the same. You're just essentially scaling that volume up. So representative is more important than necessarily being current. And then of course, look at the execution plan itself and look at the cardinality estimates to make sure that, they're accurate or representative, and they, are valid, because obviously if they're off, then that often can lead to, downstream effects, because that'll affect the join cardinality estimates, and that'll also affect placement, because the optimizer, of course, is trying to look for the most selective row source to place first. And so if your cardinality estimates are off, then the driving table can sometimes be off as well. So I typically recommend using the DBMS X plan. Again, if you're using, if you're more of a SQL person, you can use DBMS X plan display cursor to show the runtime plan. If you're an enterprise manager person, then that same information is available through the UI when you click on the plan tab as well. So either one works. One thing I would just caution is just make sure you use the DBMS X plan format. If you're using even like SQL Developer or Toad, when you generate the explain plan, I think, which is like F10 command, I strongly recommend you not use the manual explain plan anymore. The only reason I say that is because there are so many runtime transformations that actually occur, from bind peaking to subquery unnesting to subquery placement to all the cost-based transformations, that just doing a manual explain plan is probably not going to give you the same plan that's being used at runtime. So that's why I recommend use the display cursor, pass in the actual SQL ID and the child number, the cursor child number, to actually display the runtime plan that the system is using versus the explain plan, which may or may not match. And these days, more than likely, they don't match because the runtime transformations are just so large that trying to do that at explain time is. Another good example is if you have global temporary tables in your SQL statement, right? Generating an explain plan manually is going to be of no value because your temporary table is empty at that time. So here's what the output looks like. You basically call the display cursor procedure, and it's a table function. You pass it in the SQL ID and then the child number, and it dumps the plan. So it dumps the SQL text, and then the plan hash value that's being used by that child. And then it dumps the row source information. So here, for example, you can see it's accessing QP qualifiers table, and it's using the N8 index, and then you have the predicate. So it's very important also to dump the predicate information too. That's one of the differences between AWR and the using display cursor at runtime is AWR shows you only the table information. So it just shows you the operations like 0 through 4. It doesn't dump you the predicates, which are often very useful because you want to know which filters are being applied at which step, which one are index filters, which one are not index filters, for example. So here as an example, we can see that the driving table, obviously there's a single table, so it's QP qualifiers, and the optimizer selected a skip scan using the N8 index. It thinks that the index has a cost of 3, and it thinks that after applying the filters on list header ID, that it's going to get a single row. So again, here is a example that why we really want to dump the runtime plan is because it has a between predicate, and this job is actually part of the bulk price list import program, and it can operate on a range of price lists, depending on how many you're importing, because it does bulk operations. So here we can see that when this SQL was executed, the list header ID that was actually given was only 1, because that's why the optimizer estimated the rows to be 1. Otherwise, if the list header ID range was like 1,000 price lists, then we would have seen 1,000 rows in the QP qualifiers N8. So again, this is, helps you determine what range was actually specified when that SQL statement was executed. And then also, try to verify the stats when you, query it or dump the stats by looking at the table stats. So things you want to look at, of course, are, number of rows in the table, number of blocks, because the number of blocks dictate the full table scan cost. How many, blocks does it have to scan when it scans the segment? You want to look at the column stats as well to see, how selective, because if you have multiple filters, you want to see, for example, which column is more selective than the other, because that's how it generates the number of distinct values. And then also look at the index stats as well, because sometimes the index stats can be out of sync, with a table. For example, sometimes people rebuild indexes, but when you rebuild an index, the default is to compute statistics. So it'll refresh the stats, but then the table stats might be stale. So then you might have a mismatch between the column stats and the actual index stats. So again, one of the key components of statistics is, of course, NDV, or number of distinct values. That's typically the main calculation that the optimizer uses, like for equality predicates or even for range predicates as well. And so in the table stats, if you use the DBA tab columns, it's num underscore distinct. And then for DBA indexes, it's distinct underscore keys. The difference being, of course, that num distinct on the columns applies to the individual column. If your index is a single column index, then they should match, of course. But if you have a composite index, then the distinct keys on the index is the concatenated value of the composite columns that make up that index. And again, if your NDV is off, then sometimes you can have skew. For example, if you have a skewed column, such as a flag column or status column, for example, and your code is looking for pending rows, most of the rows are status complete type of thing. And sometimes when sampling is done, right, if it samples a bulk of the values that happen to be skewed, then that can also affect your number of distinct values. So these days we recommend using auto sample size, so that what happens is when you gather stats, if it detects column skew, the optimizer will graduate the sample size. So it'll usually start very small, like at 1%, sometimes even less. And then it'll graduate again to maybe like 4 or 5%. And if it still sees skews, then it'll graduate it, until the skew is resolved, so that you get a more accurate representation. And I'm sure that's probably something you might have faced in your career, where you gather stats on a table and performance is fine. You gather stats on the same table and now the performance is worse. And it's usually due to the skew factor, because basically all the number of distinct values, got messed up and are off because of that skew. And then the fix is usually to gather stats with a higher sample size. So the other thing, again, on the statistics is, look at the execution plan and see if it's, actually representative. So for example, here, it's when there's two tables being joined, the WF workflow item activity statuses and workflow process activities. And here the driving filter is we're looking for activity status that's deferred or waiting. So that's why I did an in-list iterator. And the optimizer is estimating that there's 63 such records. And then based on that, it then joins using the unique key on instance ID to process activity. So again, you would want to look at the, if you're having a SQL performance issue with this specific statement, you'd want to say, okay, is it really processing 63 rows or 100 rows or something close? Or is it way off? It's picking up tens of thousands of rows or hundreds of thousands of records. Okay, SQL profile. So SQL profile is part of the Oracle tuning pack. I've given the links there, the 12C link as well as the 19C link.
Excuse me, can we go back a slide?
Sure.
So one of the columns you can show with, DBMS X plan and all that stuff is, the actual rows processed.
Correct. With if you use the gather statistics hint.
Yes, but that's really, I find that to be the key for doing this kind of work, because you've mentioned, and you're absolutely right, is to make sure that the estimate and the actuals, have something to do with each other. And the key, obviously, is to just see that right here. Because if I, show the plan statistics, just this is cool, but all I've got is the estimate. All I've got is the guess by the optimizer. And what I really want to see is how close the guess was to reality. And I recommend, always get the, actual row counts too. And then that's where tuning really starts, is where you can look and compare, that cardinality, which is represented here with the rows column, match that against the actual rows returned. And now you've got a place to start really to, focus. Because like you say, it says it estimated 63 of these stats as well. Maybe it's 63,000, not 63. And, that would be obviously a big deal,
right.
Make a huge difference. So the point I just want to bring up is that you can see all that right here. You don't have to now go out and, look at the result set or whatever and figure out if that was right. You can get it all right here.
Yeah, it's a good point. The only caveat there is, two things, have to happen is one, the SQL statement needs to be run with the gather plan statistics hint, or you need to set an event so that every SQL in your session generates that extra statistics. And of course, there's some setup involved in the sense of, if your SQL statement has bind variables or temp tables, then you have to basically prepare that data set so that when you do execute the SQL statement, it's processing similar set of data that the runtime is. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the gather plan statistics, can be used to compare actuals. And that's actually what is kind of a good segue into the next section of SQL profile, which is largely what it does. It simulates that gather plan statistics by essentially looking at the plan that it generated, and then it uses very aggressive data sampling to essentially do the same thing, and then it compares actuals with estimates. So that's largely a lot what SQL profile is doing as well. But yeah, of course you can do that manually and then dump it with DBMS X plan so that you can actually compare. And then the beauty too is if you are able to run with a gather plan statistics, it'll also give you times as well. So you can actually you can not only zero in on the mismatches where there's a big gap between estimated cardinality and actual cardinality, but more importantly, you can identify the row source that's taking the most amount of time and then kind of drill down on that one. So SQL profile essentially is, again, it's a feature of the database that essentially allows you to change the execution plan of a SQL statement. And there are kind of two flavors, of SQL profiles. Essentially, there are what we call correctional statistics SQL profiles, and there are ones that are outline driven. And I'll talk about both. So the basic goal of a SQL profile is, again, to optimize a specific SQL statement for which the default plan that is being generated is just not optimal. And that can be for various reasons. It can be data skew, can be even join skew, for example. Predicate correlation, for example, if you have multiple predicates on the same table, well, the more predicates you have on a table, by default, it'll keep reducing your selectivity, which may not be the case, right? For example, if you have, some predicates that are correlated, such as, for example, let's say you have your order table is partitioned by quarter, and then you have a filter condition saying your order date is between, January and February, and you have another filter that says quarter is Q1, right? So those two are correlated, and we know them, of course, to be correlated, but the optimizer would treat them as, individual filters and then apply selectivity estimates. So that would further reduce the selectivity, even though we know that Q1 thing is already being, taken care of by the fact that we're only interested in the months of January, February, which are also map in Q1. So, and then there's also cases where you have NVL filters or decode expressions where it's pretty much nearly impossible for the optimizer to, ascertain accurately the cardinality, just because the NVL condition can depend on a bind variable. It could also depend on another column. For example, sometimes people say, okay, this column should be equal to NVL of this column. If that column is null, then join to this column. So there's, you can't really accurately estimate the cardinality until you actually run the SQL, because it, requires the actual data. So for those various reasons, that could be typical reasons why, where a SQL profile could be useful. Another example could be, of course, a bug. You upgraded from 12C to 19C, and all of a sudden the plan just went south due to a bug. And then you would want to use a SQL profile to kind of, restore the previous plan, for example. And so what SQL profiling does is it essentially uses data sampling, the same, mechanism that you're familiar with, which is the dynamic sampling feature, but takes it kind of one step more further, whereas the default dynamic sampling that typically happens on tables that don't have stats, like global temporary tables, or even permanent tables that are missing stats. Of course, you can graduate it, up to level 10, for example, but typically it's more designed for tables that are either missing stats or don't have stats, or indexes that don't have stats, for example. And so it basically samples very aggressively, and it samples, kind of like filter by filter. So it can actually find out saying, hey, these filters are correlated and they're not really reducing the cardinality, for example. And so therefore it can basically, generate a more accurate plan by using that data sampling results. And SQL profiles, you can manage them either through Enterprise Manager or through the PL SQL interface, DBMS SQL tool. So essentially the way SQL profile works, as a process flow is, of course, you have your query, and SQL profile can be for any SQL statement. It can be a DML, it can be a select, it can be a merge statement, doesn't have to be a query. So it goes through the SQL profile layer, which then essentially triggers the optimizer, and then that can either trigger, for example, a plan baseline, or it'll load the profile information and then execute the SQL, for example. So in a SQL profile, basically what you do is you schedule the SQL tuning advisor from Enterprise Manager. So you have a SQL statement that's showing up as expensive, and then you can click on, for example, the tuning history to see if anything was done about that SQL in the past or any recommendations, or you can basically click on the SQL tuning advisor, which will then take you to the tuning advisor page, and then basically the options there are you can specify how much time to sample, because some of the SQL, some of the SQL statements might be very complicated, and they might involve really large tables, in which case it might run for hours if you let it run unchecked, just to generate a recommended profile, for example. And so typically, the default 30 minutes, you can cap, you can reduce it to 5 minutes. And then essentially after that, it'll generate, a recommendation, which you can then, evaluate. So sometimes after that, it might generate a recommendation saying that, your statistics might be off, for example, as is one of the recommendations here. And then it's saying that, basically it came up with a rewrite, and it's recommending that, that rewrite will improve the performance of the SQL by, such and such. And then you can, essentially, either accept that plan or compare. The nice thing is you can also do compare plans, which is nice. So it actually compares your original plan and executes it. So whatever plan it was using before, it'll execute that SQL, and then it'll execute it with a new plan, and then, compare these statistics. So that's really nice, because you can actually, because sometimes, if you have a very complex SQL statement, maybe hundreds of lines long or even thousands of lines long, it's very difficult to just eyeball the plan and say, yeah, this is better. But obviously when you execute it, that's the best way to kind of validate timing wise. And then again, you can have the compare plans window, which will show you essentially the previous plan with the alternate plan that it's recommending. And then you can choose basically, once you kind of validate it timing wise, and you reviewed the plan itself, you think this is a better plan, then you can basically implement and accept that profile, and then the profile will be created. And then you can query it from VBA SQL profile, for example. And then when the profile starts getting used, it'll then start populating that in the cursor information, which is exposed through $SQL. Or if you're using the AWR SQL history, there's also a SQL profile column there that'll show up. And then of course, if you dump the runtime plan, again, if you use DBMS XPlan display cursor, in the notes field, it'll show you that the SQL profile, and then it'll give you the name used for this statement. And that's true if you had a SQL profile, if you had a SQL patch, or even if you used a baseline, all of that information will show in the notes field. So that's another way, you can also find that out. So SQL profile, again, a couple caveats, things to keep in mind when using it, is it may not necessarily result in a better plan or improved performance. That's why you absolutely have to really validate it and test with it to make sure it covers all the scenarios. A good example is, for example, if you have a SQL statement that's involving temporary tables or interface or staging tables where the data is not present at the time that you created the profile, then that might actually result in the worst plan, because again, those global temporary tables, they need some data prep, some data setup before. So if it just went and sampled, based on current contents, then they may not necessarily result in a better plan. So definitely want to make sure you validate it and make sure that the plan that the profile is using is actually better than what you had. And again, the SQL profile, as I mentioned, there's two types. There's ones that are what we call correctional statistics, which essentially adjust the estimates based on the actuals, so that it still allows the optimizer to calculate the plan, but it's just feeding it better information. So instead of saying, for example, when you said, select from orders table where open flag equals yes, previously it was estimating there's only 1,000 open orders, but in actuality it found that there was 10,000 open orders. So it would just feed that extra information in there with the hope of, generating a better plan. There is also an outline version where you essentially hard code a set of hints, and then for the most part, it'll use that plan as long as the hints are honored. And then the other thing I recommend is make note of the SQL profiles that you create, because more than likely a good chunk of them may not be necessary when you upgrade. And so typically my recommendation is, when you, as part of your upgrade testing, disable the profiles and go through your full testing cycle and see which ones are either getting better plans with the new version of the database, or which ones may still be needed, and you can just re-enable them. So it's very easy to just toggle, disabling, enabling them, but that way you can find out which ones are actually needed, following an upgrade. Okay, so SQL patch. So SQL patch is another mechanism similar to SQL profiles that also allowed you a way to essentially, override a SQL statement as far as the execution plan is concerned. Maybe, for example, it may be a package SQL statement, or a developer sometimes put in a hint. That hint may not be, valid, or It might be, for example, for a specific case, and you don't want that hint in, for example, for all the scenarios. So that's where a SQL patch, can be used. So as an example here, the developer put in a parallel hint, which is going to force, full table scan and parallel execution for all the, organizations, but that might necessarily be, that's not going to be optimal for the small orgs, as an example. So that would be an example where, without waiting for the developer to make a code change, it would be very difficult to get this fixed. So with a SQL patch, what you can do is basically here, of course, because of the parallel hint, it's forcing a full table scan on the master list, on the items table, and then forcing parallel execution. But with a SQL patch, what you can do is basically create a SQL patch to, either do a no parallel hint, as in the case that I'm given here, or you can actually give the ignore hint, which I'll talk about in subsequent slides. So this is the syntax for creating a SQL patch. You basically use that DBMS SQL tune internal, and then there's a create SQL patch or SQL profile procedure. And then you basically specify the hint syntax that you want, and then that whether you want a force match. So force match can be useful, for example, if that SQL statement had literals. In this case, it's using a bind for the org ID, but if it was using literals, then that's where the force match would come in, in use, so that all the versions of that SQL, as long as they match the same SQL signature, that patch would be used.
So is this all, again, sorry, can you go back one screen? I'm
Sure.
noticing where SQL ID equal and you've got an ID there. Is this always ID based where you need to name your SQL ID?
No, you can give it text. Actually, in my example, what I'm doing is I'm querying the SQL text by SQL ID, and then I'm passing in, when I create the SQL patch, I'm actually passing in the actual SQL text.
Ah, okay.
So you see the SQL_text column parameter?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm actually passing in the text. It's just that I'm getting the query by querying $SQL ahead of time.
Okay.
Or you could have actually passed in the text itself, or you could have got it from the AWR history or any form. So yeah, it doesn't have to be by ID. It can be by text.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's basically the same thing. It's if you got the same SQL text, you're going to get the same SQL ID. So
yeah, sometimes some
patches
general,
are
yes,
actually
but in
SQL ID based. They apply to a SQL ID.
Right. But then sometimes what might be happening is you might have not had the SQL ID because, for example, the cursor got unloaded and wasn't registered.
I know that,
right? Yeah. So you can still use it by text. It's just when it executes at runtime. Of course, every SQL statement when you execute it has a SQL ID assigned to it by the database. But the question is, when you created the patch, did you have the SQL ID available to you? If you didn't, then you can pass in the actual text itself. You don't need to pass in the SQL ID. So here, when you get the runtime plan, again, when you display it through DBMS X plan, you'll see that the SQL profile, in this case, it was a patch. And that patch was the same patch that I used here, which is at XXPCRM patch 2. So notice it notes it as a SQL profile, but it's giving the name of the patch for that. And then in $SQL, there's actually a separate column called SQL_patch, and SQL_profile would be if it was a profile. So the other thing you can do is if you want to create a SQL profile or a SQL patch using hints, then what you can do is basically dump using the DBMS X plan display cursor, and then you give the format outline. And essentially, like the example here I'm giving, so you call display cursor, you pass the SQL ID, and then you give the outline format, which will basically display the SQL. It displays, of course, the complete SQL text, all the query block names, etc., filter dump, and then at the bottom it'll give you the outline data, which is essentially the full set of hints that should be needed to reproduce the plan for that SQL. So whatever SQL statement was, whatever execution plan was being used, right, that SQL ID in this case, that A6ZZ and child number 0, these are the hints that are needed to reproduce that plan. And then basically you would take these hints. For example, if you had an upgrade scenario where it no longer used this plan and you wanted to restore this plan, then you would create a SQL profile with these hints to restore that plan. Or if you wanted to make an adjustment, for example, to these hints then you would take these outline hints and then, for example, maybe change the, particular index that I wanted to use, or change the join method or whatever it be. So the nice thing about dumping the outline is it gives you actually the fully qualified set of hints. It's not the usual set of hints that you may be used to when you're testing SQLs like in Toad or SQL Developer. It has the fully qualified query block names, like in this case, the cell $2 is the query block 2, cell $7, query block 7, etc. And then it has the fully qualified set of hints. Also, when it uses the index hint, it doesn't actually give the index name. It uses the column for format. So that's also something to keep in mind. So again, SQL profiles, you can use them to basically kind of stabilize your plan, either as part of a database upgrade, like you upgraded from 12C to 19C, and you saw a handful of SQL statements that regressed in terms of performance and wanted to either restore their previous plan or just make a tweak to one of the row sources, or maybe change the index it was using, things like that. That's generally a good option. And I would recommend that, try not to go overboard with SQL profiles. I mean, if you have to create like hundreds or thousands of profiles, then there's definitely something wrong in the system. And you should probably look at that root cause versus creating a profile for, that just becomes unmanageable. And there's usually probably a larger root cause that's requiring you to create that many profiles to get good performance. But typically, keep it to a manageable number, depending on the size of the application, obviously, but a dozen or so, or a couple dozen or so is reasonable. Once you start having hundreds or thousands of profiles, then you need to really probably look at the bigger picture. And the other benefit, of course, is this allows you to kind of upgrade the database and kind of target those specific SQL statements that had issues with the upgrades as well, either due to a bug or just due to a behavior change in the database upgrade. And again, you can obtain the, when you create the profile or the patch, I usually recommend passing in the SQL text for a couple reasons. One, then you actually know what SQL text is being executed versus just passing in an ID. And then also it gives you a chance to look at the SQL itself to get familiar with it and see maybe what might be causing it. So you can pull it either live from the library cache, VDAR SQL or GVDAR SQL, or from the DBA HIST SQL text view. And then this is how essentially the SQL profile with hints works. So again, you basically use that SQL prof attribute constructor. And then again, you select the SQL text, from the library cache based on the SQL ID, or pass in the text if you have it already. And then you basically populate that collection with all these hints. And then after specifying the hints, so notice here, for example, it has the, all the query block hints. It has the leading hint to specify the join order. The complete join order is being specified here. And then if you can see here on the index hint, so it uses the index RS ascending. So it's basically index range scan ascending. And then it's giving the table name with the query block, and it's giving the column notation. So it doesn't actually give the name of the index. It uses actually the column. So there should be an index with those columns. For example, you can actually change the profile to use index names if you want, but by default, the outline output generates the column notation. And then basically you call the import SQL profile, you pass in the text, and then you can create a category by using an optional, if you want to classify some of the SQL profiles together. And then you give the name of the profile, and then whether it's a replace. And again, force match is if it's using literals, that would be the benefit to so that it covers all the cases, even in case of literals. And then again, same thing, when you run the UMSX plan runtime plan, you'll actually see the profile being used. So that's another confirmation that you can see that maybe you created a profile and for some reason is not being used, or it's not having the desired plan. So there's usually two scenarios. One scenario would be the profile is not used at all, in which case the notes field would identify that. Because if you don't see the SQL profile.
Hey, who's got all the background noise going on? Yeah. Please mute your lines.
I think it's Sasha.
Sasha, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. So yeah, usually in two cases where you create a profile and then you're kind of scratching your head saying, how come the profile is not being used? So typically there would be two scenarios. One would be the profile is not used at all, in which case the notes field would signify that if you don't see the name of the profile there. And then in that case, it's a matter of, you need to make sure, was it in the default category? Was it the creator the same? Because it could be different schemas. You could have permissions. If it's eBiz 12.2 or higher, then, and you have additions, that can also be a factor because the addition objects, of course, change. And then there could also be, for a matching issue where the SQL is just not matching the signature of the profile. So that's another reason. The other scenario could be the profile shows as being used, but you're not getting the desired plan. For example, you wanted to use N1, but for some reason it keeps using N2 index. In that case, then the profile, of course, is being loaded, it's being used, but for some reason the N2 index isn't used. In that case, you need to review the profile hints and check the index usage or check the join order to see if something needs to be adjusted there. But in that case, your profile is actually being used, just that your desired plan wasn't used. So in that case, you need to just review the set of hints. And then another scenario that we've used also that can be useful in cases where, again, for example, it's a packaged app, or the SQL statement has an invalid hint or suboptimal hint that maybe the developer put in there by mistake, or forgot to take out, or just misunderstood how the hints worked, for example. And so in that case, what you can do is you can actually create a SQL patch and using the hint ignore optimizer embedded hints. And what this will basically do is it'll ignore all the hints in your SQL statement. So even though the hints are still there, the optimizer will ignore them and then generate the default plan. So that can be useful. Again, this is useful in the scenarios where you have a hint in the SQL statement that's wrong or a bad hint, and you basically just want it out of there. This is a way to do that, where instead of having to replace the full set of hints, you just want that hint out of there and the default plan is fine. In that case, you can use the ignore optimizer embedded hints option. Another feature just wanted to mention again with respect to tuning long-running SQLs is the cancel SQL feature. So that's a new feature, which is pretty cool. So normally, of course, when you have a long-running SQL, most DBAs would probably just kill the session. Sometimes they have automated session killers as well that are running in the background. The problem with that, of course, is you kill the session, they lose all their transaction state. Whatever work was done before that has to be rolled back. And things like that. So the alter system cancel SQL is actually pretty cool because all it does is aborts the current SQL. The session is actually still resumes its state, and it can continue processing the next set of SQL statements, for example. So the syntax for that is basically alter system cancel SQL. First number is the SID, which is 546, and then the serial number 14329, and then the next parameter is your SQL ID that you want to cancel, which is the one that that session is currently canceled. So if you do that, the session actually gets back an ORA 1013 error, which means it just canceled. So it can trap that session. It can trap that error, continue on, and move forward versus aborting the session, getting a hard error, which usually results in a 3113. And then, typically even the job, for example, if it's a background job, once you kill the session, it can't even update the job table to say the job is done. So there's usually some manual cleanup that needs to happen. So this is a nice way of kind of canceling the long-running SQL without, aborting the session altogether.
What Oracle version implemented that cancel SQL?
I believe it's 18C and higher.
18C and higher. Yeah, of course I'm stuck on 12 right now.
So next feature is SQL quarantine, which is also cool. That's also new in 19C. So this is nice, and basically, like the word suggests, quarantine, it's really cool for those SQL statements that are maybe very complicated and have multiple plans. And for example, that one of the plans is bad. You just don't want the system to run that bad plan. And so you can use the quarantine mechanism to do that by basically saying, okay, for this SQL ID, I want it quarantined, and I don't want this plan hash to be used, for example. And then there's a view called $SQL quarantine you can see whether the statement was quarantined. and how many executions were actually avoided, just for monitoring purposes. So the syntax is basically you create a quarantine config variable, which is just SQL text essentially, and you basically call the create quarantine by SQL ID, and then you pass the SQL ID and the plan hash that you want to quarantine, and then that SQL ID with that plan hash is now quarantined, and then you can monitor, for example, how many executions were been avoided. So again, just another kind of tool to avoid scenarios where under certain scenarios, these optimizers generating a bad plan, and that plan is bad, and you don't really want that plan to be used. And you can also alter quarantine as well. So for example, one thing you can do is you can quarantine by plan hash. For example, you can, in this example, we did it by plan hash, which means that I don't want this plan hash 34650 to be used ever. Another thing you can do is you can quarantine it by metrics. So you can say, CPU time, like let it run for 10 minutes or 10 seconds, and after that time, then you'll get the quarantine error. Or you can do by elapsed time as well. So for example, you can let this, if the SQL exceeds 30 seconds, I want it quarantined, for example. So that's another use case. There's also the repair advisor. So
sorry, I clicked unmute too slow. What happens in the case of say elapsed time? So you run for 30 seconds, and then what? It just stops running and that's it. And would you ever allow that particular hash to run again? Or you'd allow it to run again for another 30 seconds and then that session was quarantined? What exactly happens there?
Yeah, that's correct. It's the latter. So basically you're allowed, that SQL is allowed to run on a per call basis up to 30 seconds. And the minute it crosses 30 seconds, then it'll get quarantined.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure. And then there's also the SQL Repair Advisor. So which is part of that DBMS SQL DIAC package. This is more not for performance issues as such. Although sometimes when a SQL statement does fail, it can be perceived as a performance issue because usually the session dies abnormally and the user just sees an hourglass or a white screen kind of thing. So it could be perceived as a performance issue. But typically this is used in scenarios where the SQL is core dumping, maybe raising a 7445 error or a 600 error, and you want to find out what is going on, or maybe create an incident package so that you can upload it to Oracle, to get a fix, for example. So this is more in the case where the SQL statement is failing or hanging or not necessarily due to a long-running performance issue. There's also the advisor task that you can run. So SPM is basically part of that SQL performance management, for which it has essentially the ability to create tuning sets, for example, plan baselines. Can look at the history, for example, and the data set can come from either the AWR repository, like the SQL history, or it can come from library cache, for live SQLs. And then basically it can create those SQL tuning sets, and then it can create, plans in the background. So that's something that, normally we recommend not to create SQL plan baselines automatically, especially, of course, if you have a large number of working cursors. For example, if your packaged app runs 100,000 distinct cursors a day, or whatever that number is, you don't want to obviously have 100,000 plan baselines, even though it's going to result in the same plan you had before. But you don't necessarily want that overhead, because every time the SQL statement runs, you have to load that baseline, which again adds latency to SQL execution. So again, more try to keep it as more of a targeted, for statements that are either resulting in worse performance after the upgrade, or under certain scenarios due to data conditions or execution conditions are not getting the optimal plan. So that's where you would really want to use profiles or plan baselines or things like that. So, and you should also too, periodically, I would recommend you want to query SQL, DBA SQL profiles and DBA SQL plan baselines, just to see how many you have out there that are active and enabled. because again, you want that number to be manageable and you want it to be exception case. You don't really want it to, have that for every single SQL statement that runs in your system. It should be more of, exception based. And then basically this is the query that you can run to see if the task is configured, whether it is on, off, or auto. So again, typically we recommend to set it to off, and then schedule it, as and when needed versus, having it run in the background all the time. So quick summary, again, SQL profiles or SQL patches, they provide you a good mechanism to alter the SQL plan and improve performance of a SQL statement without having to change the code, which is obviously nice. And it's really a good way to get immediate relief where, for example, the SQL is running in minutes or hours when it should run in seconds or sub-seconds. This is a way where you can deploy the profile quickly, and the SQL statement will immediately start using that profile, and the application users will now have the performance relief that they need without having to, the normal process of opening a ticket, waiting for the developer to give you a patch, sending that patch through all your testing cycles, and finally getting it deployed to prod. So it's a useful feature, but again, use it for those exception cases rather than, applying it across the board. And as I said, when you do create a SQL profile or a SQL plan, just keep track of it, make note of it, or export out those SQL profiles to Excel. Just keep track of it so that when you do upgrade, revisit those. Hopefully with the next upgrade, you may not need them, or you may need a small subset of them, depending on the case. Real quick, just wanted to remind everyone about the MOS virtual event that's coming up. That's October 26th through the 29th. So I encourage you to register and attend. We hope to see you there. And also the Oracle Application Technology User Group. As most of you know, Collaborate, which is the conference that's usually held in April in Vegas. Due to COVID, of course, that was replaced with the OA2G Forum Live. And then they pushed out Collaborate to an in-person event in Vegas, December 7th through 11th, which again was canceled because of the current situation. And so they're continuing that OA Tug Forum. Again, it's a virtual event, December 7th to the 11th, and encourage you also to register for that as well. But that's all I had. Thanks everyone for attending, and I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. That was very, very nice and fast.
I know. I think there was some good information there, especially in my previous employment. We were using PeopleSoft,
Ooh.
and we had nothing but trouble with PeopleSoft. And this would have helped because we couldn't change code for whatever reason, for many reasons actually, for support and others. And so this would have helped them tune or improve the queries, because the customer was calling back every month. It was payroll, and they were calling back every month. It'd run fine for 4 weeks, and then it wouldn't run again for another 2 weeks. And we would do a whole bunch of things like export, import, et cetera, and then it would run good for another 5 weeks. So it would have been nice, because what was happening is obviously the plan was changing because the data was changing, or vice versa. Maybe the plan wasn't changing and the data was changing. Anyway, so that would have been helpful. So I'm not sure if anyone else is using like EBS or PeopleSoft or Hyperion. That this is very helpful in that area.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with packaged apps, like you said, Mike, you don't really have the luxury of being able to change the code. No. And, so using these kind of approaches can be very useful.
So.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Very good. Well, thank you, Ahmed. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure. You bet. Have a good night, everyone.
Hey, Ahmed, before you go.
Sure.
So where did you learn how all these latest features of Oracle 18 and 19, what do you use for your resources to
just
figure all this out?
Learn about the new features? Yeah. So a little bit of my background is, I mean, I used to work at Oracle in product development, and one of my focus areas was performance tuning. And so I ran the performance engineering team there. So I have, of course, a deep interest in performance tuning and try to keep up with all the features, you know, related to that space. And we do have a pretty close working relationship with, you know, Oracle development. They also do a lot of product briefings as well. And so usually in the product briefings, they kind of, you know, alert us of these new features that are coming. And we're also part of the testing program, you know, early access testing program as well. So we try to give them like feedback on some of these features and, you know, kind of real life, you know, you try using them in real life and then, you know, give them feedback based on that.
Plus, there's been a lot of webinars lately from many people doing Oracle 19c kind of things, such as Craig Shellhammer and Rich Nemick just did the features of 19c I think it was last week somewhere. So if you go to like viscosityna.com, you'll see all his stuff. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on right now. So.
Hey, it looks like we're recording this. How
Yes,
do I get to the recording?
Well, once we finish, it's got to save to my computer, which takes about a half hour, and then I post it. And I'm going to have to post it somewhere, probably in our SEMOP YouTube page. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but SEMOP has a YouTube page. We have now made the YouTube. Woohoo!
We are now.
Yes. So if you guys got any good cat videos, no, just kidding. So I've been posting. Go on.
Does YouTube reduce the granularity? You know, is it?
I'm not sure. If you go there now, that you could see some. I already have a couple of Rick's recordings out there, his presentations, and I think mine's out there. So.
Now we can just do a YouTube search for SEMOP.
Yep. Good. So it's not, it's an actual page, or it's, yeah, I guess that's what to call a page. So the idea is, I'm trying to figure it out, but when we do these Zoom things, we can also Zoom right away to YouTube. So you can see it on YouTube or you can see it on Zoom, but I have not tried that yet. So that's part of the reason for setting it up. Plus it took me forever to do the graphics. So for that YouTube page.
Well, I got to tell you, you know, when I said that this was fast, I know we're trying to cram a lot into a very short period of time. I think I'm going to have to probably view this a couple of times to get everything straight.
Yeah, if I could make a suggestion, though, is that the OCI is free. You do have to put your credit card, but as long as you like shut down the instance every night and stuff, it's free. You don't have to pay anything. So there you can pull some 19C databases out and test stuff out. And there's also a thing called somebody help me here, Ahmed or Rick, Live SQL. Is that what it's called? Live. I think it's called Live SQL.
Yeah, Live SQL. That's right.
Yeah, and it's let me see if I can pull it up here. And anyway, you can run queries.
LiveSQL.oracle.com.
Yeah, so there you go. LiveSQL.oracle.com. So so anyway, you can try out queries there if you wanted to try out some of these options. So so they're giving you a lot of options to go ahead and
yeah, there's a lot of tutorials and things on there too.
Yeah.
People like Fernstein put out a lot of scripts, and I think he does some of his PL SQL challenges and stuff there now too. So a lot of cool stuff you can actually get on Live SQL to see it. Can I share?
Yes. Let me. I have to reclaim it, and then you can have it. Reclaim host. Okay, and now then I say, oops, sorry. My host yet?
So where do you work nowadays, Ahmed?
I work at Cybernoor.
Cyber
Noor.
Noor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was on every one
All
of
right.
the slides.
That's a
Yeah, I filter out the meaningless stuff.
Right.
That was
Hey,
great,
Rick,
Ahmed.
you're the
I
host.
appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm the host now.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me go back to see where we're, so, okay.
Hey, while he's looking for that,
I got you. There you go.
You gotta pay attention to the road when you're driving.
Go ahead, Rick.
You got it,
So
man.
this is SQL. Whoops. Hold on a second. I got things screwed up here for me at least. Yeah, this is SQL Live. So you can go in here and you can look. They've got the sample schema and stuff. I got to sign in, but come on. Silly thing. But you can do a lot of stuff in here. I think I've deleted everything I've had out here in the past, but you can look tutorials and stuff, and you gotta like grab them and stuff. So you go over here, add tutorials, you look them up and stuff like that. You can just set up a SQL worksheet and just start doing stuff. Whoops, if I can type here. Our favorite SQL statement. And
Never do a live demo.
And away you go. You've got, and you can do stuff here. So you can, and I forget what version this is. I think it's usually the quote unquote max or most current version. Yeah, actually it says right down here, running 19.8. So it's right down here at the bottom. It says it's running 19.8. So you can go in here and try all kinds of stuff. And again, there's a lot of people that have stuff here that you can go to and try out stuff. So yeah, this whole code library. So, lots of different things. There's only 1,063 different items you can try out. So it's kind of limited, I guess, but whatever. No. But anyway, there's a lot of different things you can, do and try. And this is really useful for somebody learning SQL, obviously. You just want to, you're just teaching somebody some SQL. They don't have a database on their laptop or anything. They can go here and just start figuring stuff out and learning new things and tricks and whatnot. You want to learn about subqueries? Boom, here you go. And there's a whole tutorial here on trying different things. And then you can grab these, of course. And I can go back to my worksheet. I can put that in there. If I can learn how to type again, and then run this.
Encryption is a scary topic, and you haven't done a lot.
Of course, I got to put a semicolon on there, but
to get it set up.
Somebody's got some background noise going on.
Sorry. Do you know how to set this by default?
Say again, over.
Well, I was going to say, there's got to be some way by default on my tablet I can mute it. On my computer, it's always default muted, but my tablet is.
Yeah, as a host, you can do it, Rick. You can.
Here we go. That's
I'm not the host right now, so. But.
Oh, and I don't have these tables. But anyway, so they were in a schema right now, but I'd have to, import that schema into here. But a lot of cool stuff you can do with this live SQL stuff. And I'm just kind of showing you a little very bare bonesy kind of stuff. There's a lot of folks, again, that have stuff out here. I know Steve Fernstein in particular has some stuff out here that you can play with. I think you search like, PL SQL, and all kinds of, you can look up, working with PL SQL and all that stuff. So yeah, and it is on 19. So, if you want to try out some of the new fancy stuff that Ahmed just told us about tonight, boom, there you go. So
Very good.
Cool.
And I have one other thing. You guys got any questions? Because I have some one other thing to show you guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
I
Take
think
it back. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay. I think it was pretty cool. I think if I can reclaim host here, you are now the host. Okay, now hold on. Okay, share. Boom. Boom. I don't know if Rick or Mark or Ahmed, both Ahmeds attended the briefing, but there's a couple things we can share with everybody that is out and it's not. And one of them is they have a new release of Oracle. So starting, I don't know when they started, but they're basically introducing some innovation releases. And the idea is to get some of these new features out there, kind of test them out, but they don't necessarily, want people to go there live because they're only 2 years of support, and it's just kind of to get a flavor of the new stuff coming out. An example of an innovation release is 18C. That's an innovation release. It just kind of came out just to kind of take a look at it, stuff like that. And then the other one is what we normally have is a long-term release, which means it's going to take 5 years for support. You'll get 5 years of support plus 3 extended in for production. So with that in mind, this was all introduced and it's in the MOS note if you guys got MOS. So you can pull this up and get more information on that. And then if I can move my mouse, move, where are you? The problem with 3 screens is sometimes you don't know where your mouse is. Come on. For Christ's sakes. Okay, here we go. Oh, am I froze? Nope, I guess I'm not.
No, I see something moving.
Okay, sorry. So with that in mind, here's the projected releases. So 18C was, again, the mouse note here. 18C was just slated to end on, it's an innovation release, and it's just supposed to end on June 8th next year. The long-term release has been extended on 19, so they want everybody to go to 19 because now it's extended through 2027. So if hopefully we'll still be around in 2027, it's quite a way, 7 years. But so that's been extended out. The next one coming out is 21C, which is the innovation. 22C is, and then finally 23 will come out, and that'll be another long-term release. So basically, you're going from 19 to 23. And so 23 is going to have all those innovations that are in between 19 and 23 and forward. And then finally, here's the current support models. Some things have changed. For example, one thing that has not changed is you need to get off of 11 by this December. Then it's just basically, they say, market-driven support. So I don't know how many, is there other people besides my old company are still on 11.20.0.4?
I am proud to say Trinity has migrated upwards to 12.1 as of 3 months ago.
Good. Well, they're good through 20.
Thank you very much.
They're good through 2022. So you got a couple more years you can stay on 12.102.
And they will probably stay there.
You know what? I don't know about other companies, but I'm getting a sense that people, once they get on a version, they like it, and that's where they're going to stay. I mean,
Well,
it's
you know,
just,
I think it's really just the data warehouse there. They've got a number of other Oracle applications that they're on 19, but it's just that damn data warehouse. They just got stuck in the mud. I don't know why.
yeah, I did have a customer that was still on 10, by the way. So they love it. I mean, it just works for them. They didn't
Hey,
have
if
to
it
do much
works.
changes. Yeah, I mean, so you can kind of get that sense that. So 12.2 is good through 2022. And then 18C, as I mentioned, was a innovation release, and that's going to be till next year. And then the long-term release again is 19C. So try to get to 19C. Honestly, it's going to be best in the long term. I think most applications, maybe I don't know if Ahmed's still on, but most applications are supporting 19C now. EBS does support.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, EBS is certified with 19C as well as PeopleSoft.
One note though is with EBS, it only supports one CDB. Please note that. So
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, and by the way, 20C, by the way, is going to be or 21. Rick, did they say they're coming out with 20? I don't think.
No, 20C.
No.
What they're saying is, yeah, they were saying actually about 20C that they're essentially going to kind of like retire it at sunset with 21C.
Okay.
Because
what is it that only supports one CDB?
EBS, e-business. Yeah. So in other words, if you go to 19C and you create a container database, EBS will only allow you to, they will only support a database with one CDB. So, and by the way, that was in Rich Nemick's talk at the, he had a webinar last week on that. So that's how I kind of found out about the EBS stuff. So it only does one PDB. So that's kind of stuff that we can share with you. Here's all the information. You can get it in Moss or go to oracle.com and you can see some of the other for the market-driven support stuff. So hopefully everyone is starting to think about migrating or upgrading to 19C. I don't know. How many people are still on 10? Anybody on 10 still?
Is there anybody from Ford here who can tell us if they're still on 7?
Oh, gosh.
That wasn't that long ago, Mike.
Well, it was actually. So
yeah,
it was.
In Oracle years, it was like over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, no, I mean since we know that they were on 7, so that's only like 10 years ago, and the way those guys were, I don't know.
Yeah. As you said, I've noticed a lot of warehouses are staying on the older versions because they kind of have it figured out. And same with applications. Like I see a lot of Hyperion people just staying on 11 and 12, not moving, because a lot of times the 19C part of it is not. It's supported, but their application doesn't work right with the. It's not supported with the web portion of it, or some. There's always a mismatch kind of thing. So anyway, maybe the Ahmed too could talk about some of the 19C web stuff that's not supported or is supported. Fusion, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, maybe next month.
Okay, all right. So anyway, so that's what we got. Is there any questions? Do you guys any questions on what you saw tonight? You got any new questions that you're working on that are having issues with? Because I know there's no problems with Oracle, so you guys are probably got nothing. you guys are just sitting around watching TV during the day because there's nothing going on wrong with Oracle, right?
Absolutely.
No problems.
Never.
In all seriousness, if you guys have any kind of issues, see if we can help you with them or not. I mean, it's got a lot of new people here, so feel free to speak up.
No, thanks. This is Ahmed, number 2. Thank you, Mike, for setting this up. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Yeah. Good.
Hopefully you enjoyed it. To some of the new people out there, can I get your opinion on the meetup? Is there anything you liked about it? Anything you didn't like about it? Anything we can do better? You see Kathy and Charles and see Wiley.
Yeah, this is Wiley.
Yeah.
I was. It's a very good webinar. For the SQL tuning, yeah, I do use the package, but a lot of things that to individual level SQL tuning, and use the SQL ID and tweak the hints, and also change individual SQL profile and SQL patch. I don't know about that option, so that's definitely very, very useful for me.
Good.
And thank you. Basically, I have a question. I'm thinking. So I met a problem before when people use MicroStrategy. Because MicroStrategy has a lot of, the drag interface. So they have a really complex query. So when they have those complex query, it looks like the execution plan will be changed a lot. Is that because when there are a lot of joins and there is so many different ways to execute the SQL, so when some data or some other factor changed and there will be new execution plan? I just wondering in the inside of Oracle how this is handled.
Well, yeah, anything that changes could change a plan. I mean, the optimizer is effectively a math engine, and it's a statistical math engine. And if any of those inputs into it change, then you might end up with different plans. So even, what might seem like, oh, this is no big deal, and maybe many SQLs don't change because of a small change to a table or stats or something like that. But then there might be that one problematic SQL that just goes crazy because that change in the system affected it. So yes, the more complex the query, the more tables involved. As Ahmed was talking about earlier, the predicates are critical to the query because the optimizer takes those predicates, turns them into a math formula, and then predicts how many rows are going to come back from the table based on that. And if that number is wrong, i.e. is not in the same magnitude than what really comes back, then the optimizer came up with a good plan based on its statistics, but doesn't match the real world. And if you have a good plan right now today, and you add more data tonight, and maybe it doesn't appear to be that much different, but the skew of the data changes. Again, something Ahmed was mentioning before, the skewness of the data makes a big difference. There used to be only a few of these values. Now suddenly there's a lot, and that can throw off the optimizer. So there are literally hundreds of things. Well, if you think about it, there's thousands, because for every single column in every table that you touch, if any of the stats on any one of those columns changes, it could, affect the plan. Now, the good news is it usually doesn't, but it can. So it comes down to math. It's really that simple. And the optimizer runs math formulas to decide how many rows are going to come back for a given set of predicates on a table. That will drive, am I going to do a full table scan or an index scan, for example? Then which order I join the tables in. You've got 50 tables in the query. We'll ignore outer joins for a second. Let's say they're all inner joined. There could be 20, 30 different permutations of joins that it could possibly do. So how does it decide which table to start with and which one should it join next, et cetera, et cetera. Now, sometimes there's only a limited amount because of the nature of the joins. You don't have a lot of choices, but all those things matter. And every one of those things, as Ahmed was talking about, the stats, your predicates, more predicates. It was a great point he made. More predicates does not necessarily make for a better query. As a matter of fact, usually worse. As he mentioned, the more predicates tends to make the optimizer think it's getting less data back from a table. There's things like histograms and other statistical things that we can collect about the table. There's, I'm just forgetting the name of it, but you get multi-column statistics, extended stats, that's it. You can get extended stats. All those things can help where you have like correlated columns or you have skewness in tables, in table data, column data. But all those things you have to kind of test to be sure that it's really going to help. But yes, last year I was on a pretty big client where I was dealing with queries that literally had hundreds of tables in them and stuff. And, what was good is that actually many times run after run, they did get the same plan. Of course, I was there to help them get better plans. And it was all about the cardinality. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, ultimately tuning a query, and the real way to tune a query is to change the code. Now, what Ahmed was talking about tonight is perfect. When you can't, you can throw profiles, baselines, and patches at it to, in effect, do what you would want to do, which is change the code, but you can't. So you can use those things to get around those problems. But ultimately, the best way to tune a query is to rewrite it, because that's probably going to have the most long-term effect and lasting effect to make it a better query. But yeah, you're right. Big queries, the potential for changes in the plan obviously are much higher. We found at this site, they collected stats on a pretty regular basis, but the good news about their data is it really didn't change. Yes, the data grew every day, but it was just more of the quote unquote same data. So the skewness of the data stayed the same, the distribution of value stayed about the same, and all those kinds of things. So, but yeah, any one of those things change, boom, you got a different plan.
Well, thank you very much. And you're right. Another thing is, I know that a lot of time, it's either cannot or it's really hard to change the code. So
right.
From this point of view, this way, it's best for DBA.
Well, yeah. I like to look at all three of these techniques, profiles, baselines, and profiles as Band-Aids. You're just putting a Band-Aid on the wound. You're not really fixing the wound. You're not really, the patient will live and they'll survive, but you really need to do some surgery and to really fix it. And changing the SQL is surgery, and that requires some significant work a lot of times. When I was doing these queries last year, it wasn't like I tuned in. Some of them, I tuned in a few minutes because the problem was so bloody obvious. It was like, duh. But others required days of testing and all this, and looking at all these things that Ahmed was talking about, stats and predicates. And now in our case, it was an Exadata environment. So we actually wanted to not use indexes a lot, which, the challenge was how to get it to not use indexes. But then again, every once in a while, wait, we actually need an index here. And how do we get either to use one that's already available, or maybe very rarely. I think out of all the queries I tuned, I think 2 I recommended indexes for. I don't think either one of them got created, but because we were strictly, all we could do was change the code. So it was kind of the opposite effect of like a lot of other DBA type people. All I could do was change the code. I couldn't, I wasn't even allowed to even think about profiles and all these things at that site. That was not allowed. We had to fix the code. That was the whole focus of our gig. But, and ultimately that is really the best way to do it. But yeah, you have to have access to the code. You have to be able to test and all that kind of stuff. And we used OEM SQL Monitor for everything. And without that, I think the job would have been impossible because that, especially in Exadata with parallel processing and all that stuff, the techniques that Ahmed was showing tonight, parallel, for example, pretty much breaks down for statistics with DBMS Xplan. You aren't going to see all the statistics of all the parallel processes with that mechanism. It just not there. So in those kind of environments, you've got to have SQL Monitor, which, by the way, is available in SQL Developer too. It is an option in there. So you don't have to have OEM to use SQL Monitor. You can use it right inside SQL Developer, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff built into SQL Developer a lot of people are unaware of. And it's a pretty powerful tool. Now, we ended up using OEM at this particular site because that's just the way they were configured to run. But a lot of this you can do with SQL Developer too.
Yeah, one other comment too I was going to say in addition to what Rick said is that a lot of times with these reporting, type tools, these ad hoc tools that, generate, the SQL statements dynamically is because, a lot of times the way the functional folks map out the entities and, fact tables is essentially they just present a lot of raw fact tables and dimensions, and then the tool basically generates all the joins in SQL. So usually end up with very complex SQL statements, typically hundreds of lines long, even sometimes longer. And one thing to keep in mind too is that sometimes you get a bad plan, not because the optimizer couldn't come up with a good one, but because essentially the cutoff, triggered. Because remember, the optimizer, like Rick was saying, it runs through a complex optimization engine to to try to generate an optimal plan. But it also has cutoffs. For example, beyond a certain number of join permutations, it'll actually stop permuting, and it'll cut off certain transformations because it's trying to balance, parse time with execution. Like the nightmare scenario in the optimizer is, spending minutes parsing a SQL that, executes in subseconds, right? So they always try to kind of balance how much time is actually spent parsing and optimizing versus runtime execution. So in my experience, a lot of times with these complex SQL statements that are generated by reporting tools, like, whether you're using, Power BI or Cognos or, business objects or whatever it is, the optimizer often, the SQLs themselves take like 2-3 minutes just to parse, and you still don't really get the good plan because of those cutoffs. So sometimes that's where you have to, either try to use hints or ideally, like Rick's saying, refactor the data model, the entity model in the reporting tool itself to, use summary objects or, make sure that you encapsulate some of the joins through views or something like that. But yeah, that's also something to keep in mind, is that sometimes optimizer is not given enough time essentially to come up with a good plan. So it misses a good join or it misses a good permutation because, it essentially cuts it off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, I don't know that. Oh, I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've got a question. The force, when you, what is it, query, the one that allows
force match, you mean?
Yeah, well, so
are you talking about the bind variables?
Yeah, the one that allows it substitutes the bind variables for the plan.
Yeah, don't use that, okay?
Oh, cursor sharing. You mean cursor sharing?
Cursor sharing equals exact. Can you do that for a session?
I don't remember.
Yes, you can. You can. Yeah, you can do alter session, set cursor sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds right. I just don't remember. But don't do that.
Because I had some queries where they were the users were substituting in constants, and so I was taking the outline hints and having them put 250 outline hints in their SQL, so it would run the same way every time. But it makes me wonder if I would have just as good a luck if I set the cursor sharing force.
Yeah, I would. I'm not a big fan of it. I'll be honest. Ahmed, you may have a different point of view, but no, you need to beat those developers and tell them to use binds where it's appropriate. The problem is with force is that it puts in binds everywhere, even where a literal would be a good idea. Like a substitute or like a substring. All of a sudden, your substring has binds in it. Wait a minute, why do I have binds here? It's I'm always getting the first 5 characters. I'm not a big fan of force. I think exact is what you should do, and then make the people write the code correctly. I mean, they're using.
I wouldn't want to do that all the time, just for some of the SQL statements.
That's going to be difficult. I don't think you can do it by statement, but you can do it for the session.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, yeah, for the session.
I don't think. Is there a hint for that? I don't know.
No, yeah, there's not a hint to actually force a replacement. There's a hint to actually do the opposite, which is if it's being replaced with binds, it can. There's a hint called cursor sharing exact, which doesn't do the replacement. There's not a hint reverse.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
All right.
I'll say this about cursor sharing force and that is, as Rick said, you don't want to use it, but many times you cannot change that code. And the example I had was a few jobs back. They actually start up the web servers. This is what the process was. Select star from table where row ID equals 1. Select star from table where row ID equals 2. Select star from table where row ID equals 3. And they did this, and what they were trying to do was load up the web cache with all the data, so that all they would have to do is access the web cache.
Yeah, but every one of those things.
Well, let me
return nothing.
It did star. It returned the whole data.
Return a row.
Yeah, that's what they
where
wanted.
Row ID equal a row ID or row number.
No, where row ID.
Well, then you have. That makes no sense.
I know. Well, basically, what the code was originally written in SQL Server. They converted it to Oracle, and that's how they did it in SQL Server. So they basically were selecting by row, selecting selecting all the rows into the web cache. The point is, they didn't use force. I couldn't get them to use a bind variable, because that's the way they were. It was one of those things where we were suffering from it, but other customers were not. So it was like, well, why are we going to change this just for you, kind of thing. And by not doing it, the one web server would take 5 hours to start it up, because the cursor sharing, the shared pool would just it was unbelievable. The moment I changed it to cursor sharing equals force, it went from like 5 or 6 hours down to an hour. So I don't recommend it for everything, but there are times where you just, you have to evaluate it.
Everything, to everything, there is a time.
Yeah.
So I ran into something a couple weeks ago where there's this application, and on top of the application, they wrote a bunch of functions and procedures, and some of the SQL statements don't show an explain plan because they're embedded in functions. And so ultimately, I put trace on, and I traced entire session. And what I see is there's a bunch of code in there that's selecting values from dual. And I'm looking at it, there's all kinds of hard parses, because they parse some of this with 4 values and 5 values and 6 values and 8 values, and they're building lists for some reason to put in. And I didn't go deep into it, but I did try sharing equals force or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it did a lot fewer hard parses.
Well, sure, yeah.
And but I'm thinking, if it's selecting from dual, is it really doing hard parses to figure out the best way to pull something from dual? Or is that
well, dual isn't even a table anymore.
Yeah.
It's a memory structure.
Right.
So the thing that happened wasn't so much that, it's just that it shared those SQL statements. I mean, the hard parse for select star from dual is nothing, but it's something. And if they're doing that thousands of times a second, for example, obviously not doing that thousands of times a second helps.
I got a process that runs for a day.
Yeah. But
part of me wondered whether.
Yeah, cursor sharing, the idea is to reduce the number of hard parses, right? So if you've got, what is effectively the same statement, but just different in literals, then, you can parse once, execute many, which is, of course, the intent. And that if you've got a really, really high parse count, then yes, putting in force can reduce that hard parse count and potentially improve things. The problem is it's yet another Band-Aid. The real problem is you've got people that don't know how to code. And because, again, there are places where literals are appropriate. I remember Tom Kite, one of his founding statements was, use binds more often. But I was actually at a conference one time where he said, literals are the right idea sometimes. I almost fell out of my chair. But it's true. I mean, especially, for example, going against a histogram is always, if you've got a big skew of data, this one has a little, this one has a lot. Literals are the best way to use a histogram because you can look up the literal value and know little versus a lot. If it's a bind, well, whichever bind came in first, that's the one you get. Now there's the adaptive cursors that can play around with that, but that can get out of hand too.
So I ran this twice. And when I look at the weight statements and everything, the weights are the same between 2 times. But I get different performance, and I can't really tell whether it's the fact that I'm on a VMware server and I don't, there's CPU lag. I haven't tried really measuring the CPU, and I know I've seen something where the latest optimizer, there's more weights for CPU weight. And have you guys tried to measure CPU? So all these statements are CPU intensive, and because everything's in memory. How do I tell if one process, is using more CPU than another process if I'm on a VMware host that, I can't measure it from the OS? How do I know?
Well, you've got stats. I mean, there are stats that capture CPU time and database time and stuff like that in AWR and Ash. So those stats are there.
So there's a CPU time?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah. Ahmed showed it earlier. One of the ways you can sort the SQL in AWR is by CPU.
All right.
So that's probably what you need to be looking at. Now, I think it's been a few days, but I think in, again, SQL Monitor, you get a way better picture of resource utilization. I don't remember if it shows, Ahmed, do you remember, does the SQL Monitor show CPU as a stat, or is it just in the percent.
Yeah, it'll show up in the SQL monitor as well. So it'll show you, like, for example, this SQL saying spent 70% of its time in CPU versus doing IO or something.
Yeah.
And then also in the AWR, it'll show you the overall percentage of time that is being spent in parsing. So for example, if it'll show if it's like 3% of your time or 10%, or if it's very high, then that's probably when you would want to maybe investigate.
So if I subtract the total time, if I subtract the other weights from the total time, that gives me effectively the CPU time, right? But how do I know if my CPU isn't just running slower because it's on VMware?
Well, that's hard to govern per se, but I mean, you've got, if you've got CPU utilization, it's there. You just aren't seeing it. You're not looking for it. It is part of the stats of the statement. But if you're waiting on CPU, then you'll probably have high, oh Jesus, I just forgot the wait event.
Well, in this case, the difference between hard parse and soft parse, how do I measure that other than just wall time?
Well, you can see it, first of all. I mean, it's there. Go ahead.
Soft parse and hard parse, you should be able to see hard parse statistics versus soft parse statistics, like in your AWR report and whatnot, right? I mean, it should be pretty straightforward to see the difference between hard parse and soft parse. And hard parse is much worse because the key indicator with hard parse is you have to take the shared pool latch, and there's only one of them, which kills your concurrency, your ability to do concurrent things, because there's only one shared pool latch. Whereas if you're doing soft parsing, you have to take a library cache latch, but there are multiple library cache latches, so it's not as bad. That's one of the big things between hard parse and soft parse. But you should be able to see the hard parse count, the soft parse count, and be able to determine how many you're doing of each.
Well, yeah, I know how. So, okay, all right. So, what you're telling me is it's there. I got to go look for it.
Yes.
Basically, yeah, that's about it.
It's a hunting expedition.
It's in there.
Sachin was asking a question. Is anybody else using SAS and having any performance in 19C and having performance issues by chance? The SAS application? I guess.
We use it in 11.204.
You use it SAS with 11.204, not 19?
Right.
And any performance issues that you're experienced with SAS at all?
I tune the SQL. But,
okay. But you haven't migrated that to 19, have you?
No.
Okay. All right. Is there any? Well, we've had a great conversation tonight. So thanks to everyone. Is there any other stuff people want to talk about or question on? Or
hey, this is Charles Lin.
Charles, yeah. Sure, go ahead, Charles.
I wonder if anyone has X data and the ODA virtualization experience, like using OVM. Because my company is thinking about going that route to consolidate the X data and the ODA. So I just wondering, is any good and bad on that?
The one thing about ODA is it can only run Oracle databases on there versus a PCA, which can run anything. But they have one thing in common. Number one, they still run off the same hardware. The latest hardware is X8, I think is X8 2. But OVM, so comparing it to the VMware, this is my opinion, but the performance, in my opinion, is about the same. You know, you still have to manage the noisy neighbor, that kind of stuff. But what I'm noticing that cloud administrators are doing now, they're just putting people wherever. And if they have to move it, they can just move it really easy. They don't care. It's kind of like storage. Back in the day, they used to plan where storage went. You know, the system table space always went near the core, and they kind of went out that way. Nowadays, they just put storage anywhere. The same with cloud. They just put these VMs on any, and if it causes a noisy neighborhood kind of thing, they kind of move it. So that's common between VMware and OVM. The one thing that is not, though, is VMware has a lot of cool features, and it's easy to manage. Very, very easy to manage. The downside to OVM is it's very clunky. You can't, you just can't get there from here, kind of thing, if you wanted to do some stuff. So from the OVM layer, it's very hard to manage. Like, to move a VM from one place to another is not as easy as with VMware. On the plus side of VMware, or on OVM, is that if you have a database that's on OVM running Linux and on ODA, you get a 0.25 core discount. So you're only paying for 0.25 core. So if you have 8 CPUs, you only pay for 2 of those CPUs, because you're using Linux, you're using the OVM, and you're using the ODA. Those 3 things combined will give you a 0.25 core. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's many pluses and minuses both ways. You kind of have to weigh it out, what you're really trying to do. But I do know the cloud administrators just cuss and just hate OVM, just absolutely hate it, because you just can't do what VMware can do. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thanks. How about the idea of X-data, running OVM on X-data, and running production and the non-production environment in the same machine?
I don't know, Rick maybe can talk about the Exadata a little bit more, but for example, Exadata still uses OVM, by the way. So the thing is, I think because the Exadata is so costly, people tend to stick everything. They just create different tenancies, kind of like thing, so that production can't see dev, and dev can't see production. So they kind of create a different tendency, but obviously it's kind of dangerous. The ones that I've seen do it successfully, they have an Exadata, actually 2 Exadata that's running prod, and then they have 2 Exadata running dev. But that's expensive, so.
Yeah, that's why we try to consolidate our production and non-production X-data to one server.
Well, again, it's like it doesn't matter if it's Exadata or just a regular box. If you're putting production and dev on the same box, number one, maintenance is going to be a little bit more difficult, because you can't just apply a patch anymore, without affecting prod, or you'd have to be very careful that, And secondly, if you lose that machine, everything's lost, right? So, it's. I'll let someone else speak on the Exadata portion of it, but.
How about patch OVM? Is there any technical difficulty?
No, patching OVM is actually nice, because when you patch at that higher level, it does everything in no downtime. So especially if you're using Unbreakable Linux, OEL, Unbreakable Linux. So patching is really smooth. But again, what I've been told from the cloud administrators is that VMware is like, you just click a button and everything happens. With OVM, it's like, VMware would be one click, OVM is 20. that's the kind of difference of effort kind of stuff. So it does the same stuff. It just takes longer to get there. So hopefully it answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I think we're pushing 9 o'clock. I think it's time to
I know the
pull
pizza.
on this.
I'm still waiting for the pizza.
I'm still waiting for my pizza too. Yeah. So.
Well, hopefully we'll be back to being, you know, live again sometime in the near future, I hope. All right, guys. Well, thanks for attending the recording. Well, I'll get that to everybody. Mark had mentioned there's a way that you guys can record it on yourself. I have to figure out how to do that. I think you have to do it at the beginning of the meeting, though. So we'll figure it out. But the recording should be available tomorrow. So
great.
So anywho, you guys all have a great night. We'll see you next month. Next month we got a great topic.
I sent you a link.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
All right.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Ahmed. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Oh, before I forget, can you send me the presentation so I can upload the slides as well?
Sure, will do.
Okay.
Thanks,
Talk
everyone.
to you guys. Yeah.
Yep. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah.
Nice.
Bye-bye.